love is stained with blood, where hope is eclipsed by despair.
Hello, and welcome to the Bomb Squad podcast. This is the host for today's cast, Ethan, and with me I have...
Austin Zwiebelman.
Tim M. Sullivan.
And today we will be discussing the 1985 anime feature film Vampire Hunter D, not Wicked City. Due to some concerns that were raised to us regarding the content of Wicked City, we opted not to use it in the main cast series, so we're going to refrain from that. But instead, we will be talking about another adaptation of a Hideyuki Kikuchi novel, Vampire Hunter D from 1985, directed by Toyoo Ashida. And just a little bit of background on the film, for those of you who are only vaguely familiar, Vampire Hunter D was one of the first big home video sort of hits of Japanese animation in the States. It was dubbed by Streamline and released over here in various capacities with like a proper subtitled theatrical release and a lot of home video stuff, and it aired on television along with oftentimes Robot Carnival and Twilight of the Cockroaches. The film itself is a pretty interesting sort of science fiction film. The director, Toyoo Ashida, he's best known as probably the character designer for the magical girl anime, Minky Momo. And I know him from Round Vernian Vifum, which is an old mecha anime. And there's a character named Roddy Shuttle who just looks exactly like Dan. Like, he basically just completely recycled the character design. It's great. Probably most relevant, and the reason he's working here on Vampire Hunter D is he was the director of Fist of the North Star, both the television series and the film, which is a post-apocalyptic Mad Max-alike series, and why he's on Vampire Hunter D. And so that's just a little bit of background on the film, sort of a general review, but I'm curious if either of you have any history with the film at all. Tim?
I think this was one that I had started hearing about in high school. That was when I kind of started getting into like darker, edgier anime. I was starting getting into horror stuff. So like that was when I was watching stuff like Hellsing and Blood the Last Vampire and Elfen Lied, Devilman. So this was definitely one of those titles that came up around that time. And I think that I tried watching it in high school, and like I couldn't get past the animation of it. It just felt very like old and cheap from my perspective at that time. Fast forward to 2014, I think, 2013, 2014. I see the Urban Vision VHS tape for it at a local video store, Slackers, for 50 cents. And so I decided to pick it up for 50 cents. And they also had the sequel, Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, for $15. So I bought that as well. And so I watched them then, and I had a greater appreciation for them. I was a little bit older at that point. I was like 21, 22, something like that. I enjoyed them a lot, and I've watched them multiple times. It's just sort of like an October tradition. I revisit them fairly frequently. Not too long after the Blu-rays got released, I ended up picking them up, but I still have my old copies. So like right here, I have the VHS and the Blu-ray of the original film. I keep them both because I like having the original as part of my collection, the classic VHS. Yeah, that's about all I have to say as far as history goes. This movie I've revisited several times and enjoy quite a bit.
Yeah, and regarding like what you kind of launched into with kind of bouncing off it initially, I definitely see that. Even for the day, it does look a little cheap. It was made with the OVA market in mind, as opposed to. It was released as a feature, but it was clearly made to live in the realm of video more than anything.
It wasn't like Devilman, where it was an OVA that was like not super expensively made, but it was like extra gory.
Yeah, or even just like there's a lot of the composition is pretty simplistic.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing, or just the character designs and that sort of thing. There's a lot to like in it, but there's also a lot of things that are pretty representative of the limitations they were given, particularly with budget, which not a bad thing, but just sort of a byproduct that affects the finished piece and how you can go back to it today. Austin, do you have any history with this film?
This was a while ago and kind of hard to remember, but this got brought up on the Megazone cast. I know that was years ago. But then it was mentioned on the Cowboy Bebop podcast. But generally, I didn't have an experience with this. It might have been so long ago, I don't remember the movie. But generally, we pivoted to this last night. And since then, I've been able to watch it 23 times because this movie is shorter than an Italian grandmother. This is the shortest movie I've ever come across in all of my travels. So I'd like to think I'm a Vampire Hunter D veteran just because of how many times I've seen the movie since 11 o'clock last night.
That's fair. It is short. It's less short than I remember for some reason. I don't know why. I've only seen this movie years ago, years upon years, when I was first getting into like streamlined dubs. I remember this movie being 45 minutes long. I remember it being an OVA length. I don't know why. I haven't revisited it since then, so I have no idea why I thought it was that short. And I guess that sort of leads pretty swimmingly into my history, which is I learned about Vampire Hunter D when I was first getting into streamlined dubs as a result of my love of Robotech, a love which makes every other anime fan hate me, and rightfully so.
By every anime fan, he means Tanner.
God. Every Tanime, Anne. And so I watched their dub of Megazone 2, 3, and several other dubs that they produced, and I really love them. But sometimes they whiff. And Vampire Hunter D was definitely a whiff. I think that's why it didn't stick quite so much in my memory at the time, despite some nicer aspects, which I'll get into. But other than that, I haven't really revisited. I really like the sequel film. I'm not super familiar with the novels. I'm familiar with Toyoo Ashida's other work. Again, Fist of the North Star is great. And Fist of the North Star, the movie, which was also dubbed by Streamline in a pretty good dub by them. It's a silly dub, sort of intentionally so, as opposed to Vampire Hunter D's dub, which is not intentionally bad. I would like to imagine that they wouldn't make a bad dub on purpose. And the other adaptation Streamline did of Kikuchi novels in Wicked City and Demon City Shinjuku, which are films that are more stylish, perhaps, than D, but not quite as fun, which is a bit of an understatement in the case of Wicked City, the unfunnest movie. But I guess that leads sort of discussing the quality of the dub and sort of the fun factor of Vampire Hunter D. Tim, what are your overall thoughts on the film and how it holds up?
It's a very fun, just like little short movie, and it's like I haven't read any of the novels. I don't really know anything like about the larger story beyond those two movies, but like it gives you a good enough like idea of what the deal is with the character. Like you get into like who D is and why, like what makes him special. Like he's a Dampier, and like I have to remind myself that he's a Dampier because the sequel keeps calling him a Dunpeel.
Ah, so that's the guy, the Dunpeel Hunter. I've heard about him.
I don't know why they did that.
That's a remnant of the Streamline dub. They call him a damn peel in that.
An ordinary man would have been drained within a few minutes, but since he's a Dampier...
Dampier?
Because they didn't know that Dampier was a word. The English translated scripts didn't. They just said Dampiel, and that at the time it wasn't terribly well known.
When I watched the Streamline dub, like I couldn't really tell what they were saying, so I guess that's fair. He's a
He's a pooper.
Klatu Parata.
A Dampier, The half-breed spawn of a vampire and a human.
But yeah, it's enjoyable if you're able to get past sort of the like cheap oldness of the animation, which that's something that's not as much of an issue for me now. Like I do enjoy older stuff. I do enjoy older OVAs. I've watched some of the older Gundam anime and Votoms fairly recently. I try to be more open to older anime stuff than I was when I was younger. Getting past that, like I do enjoy it just as a short little fun film. As a big fan of Hellsing, I enjoy it as just sort of like the thing that basically inspired the character of Alucard and Helsing. Like you definitely have like very similar kind of outfits and like the hat and just like the concept of the vampire character who hunts vampires. It's sort of neat to see D as sort of the origin of Alucard, who's a character I really like. So I enjoyed on that level. Overall, fun movie. Enjoyed. He the best.
Roger Ebert gave him 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, I think that's something I can definitely say. Like the influence of this film is really palpable. Like especially if you're a Castlevania fan, Symphony of the Night. There's definitely a lot of D and Alucard.
Just all of the Alucards.
Yeah, all of the Alucards. The Alucard from Castlevania and the Alucard from... Everybody likes that joke because it's a good bit. Particularly, I think the visuals I definitely get too. They can be a barrier to entry even for the day at some times. I wouldn't say all the time because it does have some very pretty shots. But
Yeah, like that one shot towards the end where like we see like the clouds and the weathering, like that whole sequence looks gorgeous. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the movie doesn't look quite like that.
Which fair. It has some rough spots. It's got some jank, some cruft.
But it also does have like some really cool like monster stuff, which that's probably the thing that might be the thing that I enjoy about this even more so than Bloodlust, which I do think Bloodlust is an overall stronger movie, but I do think that some of the like monster design stuff in this one is a little more interesting to me.
Yeah, I think it kind of revels in sort of the science fiction of it a bit more than Bloodlust does. Because Bloodlust has a little bit of that with the gunplay, but the gothic element is clearly pushed to the fore hard in that. And I love it. It got kind of Wizards vibes in how I just love the subtle little world building stuff throughout, or even like Fist of the North Star. There's a lot of Fist of the North Star in there. And these freaks that he has to fight his way through, like the big guy a la Hart from Fist of the North Star, the big man who eats people. There really is a lot of DNA in there, or even like the 3 mutants have like the quality of a Dragon Ball film almost. What are the specialties they'll introduce before you fight the big bad of the film? What I'm saying is Vampire Hunter D inspired the Lord Slug OVA. It always comes back to Lord Slug, too. Lord Slug and Turles. Jeez. But no, Austin, your thoughts on the film?
With the monsters, there's a moment when D is first going into Lee's castle for the first time, and he sees this just horde of these really creatively designed monsters that look really strange because of the cheap animation. And it just reminded me of the SpongeBob episode Rock Bottom, when SpongeBob is stuck with all of these deep sea creatures at a bus stop or nearby a bus stop. It was that sort of level for me. Rest in peace to the jellyfish monster who gets on D's barrier fence. I mostly just wrote down a bunch of jokes for this one because something about the movie, more casual tone for this. Here's just some general thoughts I had watching this. Lamika's mouth is so unbelievably tiny. Small mouth. This movie's progressive for making the tentacle-shaped monster a lady-shaped tentacle monster. Dr. Faringo trying to shoot the golem when it's trying to break into Dee's little safe house was hilariously futile. It could make a good reaction image, like me staying up all night versus final exam, me trying not to wake up my parents at night versus our dogs, Bomb Squad Productions versus Google Ads. I think the reason that the antagonist Lee did this whole thing is because he likes to deliver people bad news about Dampiers. Getting to tell the lady that, Dee was a Dampier, and especially, he's been waiting a long time to get to tell his daughter that she's a halfie. I think that was a lot of his plot and motivation. This man kills 3 Gyarados by having 5-hour energy coursing through his veins instead of blood. And then Dee proceeds to keep killing Pokemon. He goes to murder Golem next, and I gotta admit, I felt kind of bad for Golem. Greco's death off-screen was a mistake, because we see a sheep get killed, we see the jellyfish die, but then Greco gets the No Country for Old Men treatment? That was a misstep. I also admired how Dee doesn't die. He dies agonally. Like, he dies diagonally. That was an interesting direction to die when he gets stabbed by Rey. I kind of want to make a loop of Dan falling forever when he gets pushed into that sort of Star Wars Episode 5 place.
God, it is very funny when he's falling through the air because he's falling so fast and he's just absolutely tumbling down this shaft, just doing flips.
Yeah, I like the fact that Rey says comrades. You know, that's kind of based. Like, he's a sadistic moron, but at least he's a leftist, which makes me assume he's a Maoist.
Based and Ray-pilled. God.
I legit laughed so hard. How'd you guys like the moment when the Count's congregation is, like, wishing him well at the wedding? Just this army of ghouls just being like, congratulations on your new wife, all in tandem. That was...
God.
Lastly, I just think the ending goes on for some time. That was the last thing that stuck out to me when I was watching this was just sort of the pace of the ending and how it just never seemed to die. It just kept going.
Yeah, no, it's like, it feels like it should end at 70 minutes and then it just keeps going for 10. It's absurd. Like, I was like, oh yeah, did I forget a really big fight with Magnus at the end? And then it's just like, oh no, we're just gonna spend like 5 minutes just cutting back and forth between Dee and Lamika as she's like, I have to die. And then he's like, no, you don't have to. And then she's like, I have to. And then she dies.
Yeah, and that's a list in sort of the exact order it happened in the film of all my thoughts on that film regarding just like general thoughts.
That's sort of the way I approach it. Like I can appreciate it on like a craftsman's level. Like, I think, oh, the composition is very effective. They make a good use of limited animation and they do a lot of like effects stuff. Like, there's a shot early on where most of it is just seeing Doris's hair whipping in the wind, and they have the layer of animated lines to convey the movement of the wind and everything. And I really like that. The movement on the hair is very erratic, but it's like what hair caught up in a gale would look like. But then a lot of it is just like, haha, that's dumb, or that's weird, or unique, or just... It's a very trashy sort of film in a lot of aspects, sort of like Fist of the North Star, the movie. Like, it's hyper-violent and it's absurd. It's also sort of opening up new audiences, basically, in terms of who you could market something to, because it's being marketed towards young men and adults as opposed to, you know, children who you're going to sell toys to, ostensibly, or like an older audience. Sort of thing, but it's not pornography. it's not just like straight up adult film OVA, like, you know, Legend of the Overfiend or Wicked City, and it's fun. Like, it's one of the earliest examples I can think of what is the archetypal sort of OVA. But as a result, because it's early, it's not too hyper violent. Like, it's not like egregiously so. In a way that makes it a bit more approachable.
Makes it terrible on Cartoon Network.
Yeah.
It's not Genocyber.
Yeah, it's not Genocyber. It's not MD Geist 2. It's not Wicked City. God bless. Sorry to all the Wicked City fans, but you're wrong. And sort of on that track, I like it. I think it's a good, fun movie with cool ideas. I like its world building a lot. It's subtle and cool, and the way it sort of just brute forces its like fantastical elements with the science fiction stuff, like Doris's more almost fantastical outfit, and then Dan in his kind of Mad Max gear with the baguettes for shoulder pads. And their weird laser guns that look like French Revolutionary era rifles. I kind of love it. Like, it's this weird thing that doesn't properly gel, but that's sort of the appeal because it's post-apocalyptic. It feels very hodgepodge in a fun way, not in a this is wrong way. And that does also transition well into opinions on the film's visuals. Tim.
I have to agree. I do think that like the just sort of the like blend of like classic aesthetics with the more like technological futuristic stuff. I think it's done well here. Like, we see a lot of anime stuff and video game stuff that tries to do that, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't seem super interesting. I think it really works well here. I do think like the world of it is very interesting to look at. I think the monsters are really cool in like that gross kind of way that's not too much, but it's enough that like it has a sort of like an intriguing quality to it. I think there's a lot in this film that it makes it enjoyable to look at, even if like the art and animation is kind of cheap. Like it is definitely visually interesting, just like conceptually. There's just like a lot of cool stuff there, I think.
Yeah. I mean, sort of furthering the anachronism of it, like discussing like the bridal procession when they're going through these vast like technological halls in their goofy robes, like LARPing, like they look like cheap costumes almost even, and the Count in his like stereotypical, like he's dressed like Bela Lugosi's Dracula, basically, as he's walking through the interior of the Death Star here. That hard contrast is fun in its own right, in a pretty compelling way. So I definitely agree with you. And then and some of the monster designs too, going into that, like the one in the opening with the man teeth, like the flat herbivore teeth that spits like poison blood out at people. Like that's a freaky looking monster, and I just like the way it moves and everything. It's very impressive. Or the cyborg horses. Holy I can't believe those haven't gotten brought up yet. But those are rad as hell because they have like horns and stuff, but like only, and I love that they're cyborgs. They're not just all robot. It's just like the front, like the head is robot with like a brain casing or some and I love it. It's silly, but so fun. Austin, your thoughts on the film's visuals?
After watching what happens to Doris's horse in the beginning, I was so thankful to see a robotic horse. I was like, finally, somebody preempted the problem. Felt so bad. So who did the I hear that this is manga or books. This is like something with illustrations, right?
Okay, so it's a novel series primarily, but there is a manga as well. The original illustrator for because there were illustrations to accompany the books. The illustrator who is most associated with Vampire Hunter D is Yoshitaka Amano, the guy who does the Final Fantasy art, is what he's best known for. And so these designs are sort of a blend between his art and Ashida's house style.
I like to think that you'd like take the Final Fantasy man's art and you try to make it 16-bit, like sort of if you could do that, like whittle it down and like dumb it down and make it less detailed. It's sort of like you're going into a feature like the anime expecting something modern like a PS4 game, and this, due to how far back it was and due to the limited budget, is sort of like stepping down your expectations for a video game visual down to like SNES era. That's sort of like the level of complexity they were able to convey on the budget, which, by the way, is a hidden number I can't find. I have looked around, and the budget to Vampire Hunter D seems harder to find than the key that cracks Blu-ray encryption, okay? No, I can't find the number! I think that all the characters, like the cheapness of it actually made it a little bit fun, just because it's so cute and non-threatening and very, very much just like ramshackle, and then somebody will just straight up get chopped in half down the middle, which, by the way, is an indicator for how good an ultraviolet film is. It's not an ultraviolet film unless somebody gets chopped in half this way, okay? This was so much fun. There's a painted sort of background that flies by people when they're having like a moment of surprise or intensity. And I like specifically that background, the colors that they used and how they did the pattern. That always was fun when it popped up.
Yeah, that background, I definitely get what you mean. It definitely has like bowling alley carpet vibes almost too for the colors they use, like the purples and greens. And I think there's like a little bit of orange in there on the like black primary almost. It is an odd choice for your speed lines, but I do like it. It's distinct, very singular. And I don't mean to rag on this film. It has some great composition throughout. Like, again, like this is the guy who was the chief director for Fist of the North Star. He has an idea of how to make some pretty darn good action on a limited budget. And also, poor Ashida, he's juggling. Like, he was still chief director of the Fist of the North Star TV series as it was happening, and he was also the Fist of the North Star movie came out a few months after this. So he was working on that while working on this. Because this came out in, I think, December of 1985, and then Fist of the North Star, the movie, came out in, I think, March of 1986. So he was chief director on the television series while making 2 feature films. Just the fact that it exists at all is impressive.
Yeah. This man when he made this movie is like, finally I can show a man's head explode and it won't get censored.
God, yeah, we don't need to put any weird filters that only the Italians get a version where it's clean.
That part was so good! I love that!
God, poor Ray. Poor Ray. That's actually, he's directed 2 films where a guy with bluish blonde hair named Ray gets absolutely destroyed by the big bad before the hero is able to come and step in. That's happens in Fist of the North Star, the movie at the end. Yeah, no, there are some, again, like weird parallels narratively to this and Fist of the North Star that I like, that I think is cool. It's about wandering strangers who come into town to beat the shit out of some people, save some innocent townspeople, all that. In Fist of the North Star. Oh, then both of them show up in their respective films. D has a cameo in frame at the end of Fist of the North Star. And Kenshiro actually has a very brief cameo in this film as one of the townspeople.
Nani?
Yeah, exactly. He does look very confused in that shot too, so it's appropriate. Yeah, it's clear that he's pulling on that experience with that, but he's like, I can use it to make a kind of schlocky science fiction thing that will be absolutely perfect for a nascent American market that is hungry for mature cartoon.
So then, Vampire Hunter D is set in the year 1990X, confirmed.
Yeah, 1990X, as opposed... I don't think it is explicitly stated in the novels, as opposed to the movie where it's the absurd... Like, I guess that's a good way of future-proofing your movie, is saying it's in the year 12,000.
The year is 12,090 AD.
People in the year 12,000 will be like, this is bull. We still have to pay taxes.
God. We were supposed to have vampires, not whatever awful thing that's going to suck instead. Different kind of suck. That wasn't intended. God. The film, I like Ashida's designs, frankly. They're extremely 80s. They're a little cutesy for the material, a lot of them. Yeah, just some of them are like unusual. Like they clash a little bit, but I don't mind necessarily. I kind of like that effect. Again, it's the weird pieces all fitting together. If anything, I think Magnus's design is maybe a little boring-ish, but honestly, I can't get past the inherent comedy of having a stock Dracula man kind of as the villain of the piece, because he just completely clashes with everything, which I adore, as you can see.
There's an animator on the special features from the Urban Vision DVD that says that the purple guy, I forget his name, the purple flying guy, said he looked like a villain from Kamen Rider, apparently.
Kamen Rider, oh, good lord. I will locate that Kamen Rider man, so the viewers like you can see that Kamen Rider man. There's a lot of characters. Like I think Golem is probably inspired by that large man in the Fist of the North Star opening that I can't remember if he even shows up. They're just a big dude in the opening that Kenshiro has to explode. I wouldn't doubt it, but yeah. Moving on. This film's visuals are unique and singular, and kind of jank, but kind of fun. Really fun, actually. On that note, let's move into the topic of dubs. So, Tim, which dub did you watch? And what were your thoughts on it?
For this viewing, I watched the Sentai dub, just because that was what was on the Blu-ray. But I do have some fondness for the streamlined dub because it's goofy in an endearing sort of way that I really enjoy. I wish that was included on the Sentai Blu-ray, but I wanted to watch this in HD last night, so I just threw on the Sentai dub. I do think the Sentai dub is enjoyable, but I don't necessarily have the same enjoyment for it, I guess. But I think both work on their own merit.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Sentai is weirdly bad about that, about including old dubs of things on their releases, which is frustrating. Venus Wars it lacked its original dub, and Lock the Superman, their release of it, didn't have the original English dub. It's subtitle only, because the original English dub is a weird, messy thing from a Hong Kong dub job, basically.
Man, when are we gonna get the Singapore dub of Yu-Gi-Oh over here?
God.
Hold on tight, Tsunami. Don't get thrown out of the board.
Yeah, there's so many weird dubs that we'll never get. It's frustrating. But I get what you mean regarding the streamlined dub. I have thoughts. I kind of like Sentai's dub for what is probably the stupidest possible reason, but I'll get into that. Austin, which version did you watch and what did you think?
I was able to watch the Sentai dub and Japanese, but I wasn't able to get to Streamline. I made a note of in the Sentai dub, there's right after Greco has his Clarence Brodicker moment when he pushes the ladies out, he says the line, "I need the key to the secret spy room," which was a pretty peak moment.
Hold still. I need the key to the secret spy room.
I thought that Ray sounded a lot better in the original Japanese. Like, there was sort of like a strange nobility and a respectability, and then they just made him sound like a total ass in the Sentai dub, which is odd, because you get a completely different impression of his character based on the dub, and I'd say that you should watch it in the original Japanese so that the psychological dynamic of the movie changes a little for the better, because there's a lot of Ray in this. And the other thing was, because I saw this for the first time in Japanese, for some reason, I wasn't expecting the Southern accents. Like, when I got to watching these in English dubs and, like, Dan showed up for the first time, and it was just like, what kind of quiet man are you? Like, it was strange. I guess I gotta go check out the Streamline one, because some people like it better. I read in the comments it might be better. Ethan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the Streamline dub is one of their less good ones. It has some very strong performances. I really love Michael McConaughey as D, but that's just because I love Michael McConaughey. The performer who plays Ray, who is of course the one person I didn't write down. I love him. He plays Sean Phillips in Robotech, of course, because everybody who is in a Streamline dub was in Robotech at some point. That's why I like Streamline so much.
Kerrigan Mahan, according to Wikipedia.
Yeah, Kerrigan Mahan. Yes. Great performance. I think he does the kind of a good balance. I think he's just a bit more monotone, which complements, and he's got sort of a naturally slightly greasy voice, but just a little bit, just a tiny bit, like greasy with a heart of gold. He's ultimately a noble person, but just a little bit of grease. How many times can I say grease?
Greased up that guy.
But there are good actors in this too. Like Laura Cody plays Dan, and Barbara Goodson, who played the English voice of young Goku in Harmony Gold's dub, and she's just in a ton of stuff. But they both give weird performances. Even Eddie Merman, who plays Lamika, she's doing this weird accent throughout, and there's a lot of weird accents in the Streamline dub that are just difficult to parse. It's like, I guess it's authentic to how accents would be in the year 12,000, but I don't know if it reads that way, really. I think the Sentai dub is overall stronger, and I kind of enjoy it because it's a modern dub in a lot of ways, but also it just feels like an old ADV dub, which is charming in its own right. It's got some weird jokes inserted, not like the Streamline dub, which just inserts whole lines where there initially were none, like that scene in the graveyard with Magnus, where he's talking. He's like, he introduces himself to Doris. That doesn't really happen in the Streamline or in the Sentai dub, at least, because I did not get a chance to look through the Japanese for this rewatch, which I'm sure it's great. Usually, the Japanese is the best way to kind of enjoy something in its ideal, like in the way the creators intended, at the very least. So yeah, if that is what you're after, I highly recommend that way of viewing this film. But overall, I liked the Sentai dub in a way I don't necessarily usually like their redubs of things, but it also doesn't hurt that the Streamline dub is one of their weaker ones, and that's why, like 9 times out of 10, whenever ADV redubbed something, I always would be like, man, I would love the Streamline dub was included on this, but then you don't do that, which is frustrating. But then ADV died, and everybody else got their licenses, Discotek and Nozomi, and re-released them with all of the dubs, so we're fine. Speaking of performances and the weirdness, and this sort of been the elephant in the room throughout this podcast, is sort of how it stacks up against its sequel, ? Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, the film from the early 2000s. I want to say 2001 or 2002. Ooh, that's why you make better notes. 2000?
Yep.
So yeah, Vampire Hunter D released in 2000. Vampire Hunter D.
It wasn't just called Vampire Hunter D 2000.
God. That I'm actually shocked they didn't do that. I'm happy that they went with the slightly more tasteful title, I suppose. But yeah, because everybody did that back then. It was the equivalent of putting 64 in your Nintendo 64 games title.
There was like legit a whole season of South Park where every episode had 2000 at the end of the title.
God, I love that. That's finally a good joke from South Park. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. South Park's fine. That one was for Tanner.
You just hurt South Park guys' feelings.
Ethan, I'm sorry. It came out in Fantasia Fest in 2000. It came out in Japan in 2001. I'm sorry.
Well, actually, it was made for the U.S. market.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bloodlines was a co-production with Urban Vision. It was made specifically for the U.S. Like, there was a dub before there was a Japanese language track produced.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Pyramid of Light movie in that those were both made for Western audiences and then got brought to Japan.
Yeah, that is a thing about Bloodlust that is sort of important to address. There was this weird time in the late 90s and early 2000s when anime studios were flush with cash and they could just commission things like whole-ass movies in a way that you don't see quite so much anymore. Like ADV commissioned a movie of the video game Sin, of all things. Yeah, the Sin. It's an old shooter.
I watched that. I have not played that game, so I had no idea what I was watching.
It was very technically impressive for its day, and the movie is nothing like the movie is much more serious than the game. Or like Central Park Media, they actually funded a sequel to MD Geist, the OVA. MD Geist 2 is technically partially funded by Central Park Media. I believe Manga actually funded Ghost in the Shell in some part, the company that distributed it, because I believe they're in the original credits for that film. In some capacity, they assisted with that film. That, or they've just been burnt into the credits at this point, even like the original Japanese language credits. And that's sort of an interesting thing, because it almost conforms more to Western tastes in a lot of ways, Bloodlust. Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust is interesting because it is sort of a response to, I think, the popular consciousness's memory of the original Vampire Hunter D as this cool thing that combines science fiction. But as a result, it's a lot more stylish. Interestingly, it's the director Yoshiaki Kawajiri who directed the other two adaptations of Kikuchi novels, Wicked City and Demon City Shinjuku. He finally got his chance to work with Vampire Hunter D. Kikuchi has 3 main novel series, and those are Shinjuku, Wicked City, and D. So he's worked on them all, baby. And I would say Bloodlust is easily the best of the 3. But before we get into my bad opinions, Tim, what are your thoughts on Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust? I
do think Bloodlust is the stronger movie in a lot of ways. I think it's one of the most gorgeous cell animated films ever. Like what I was talking about on the Bebop podcast. It's one of those movies where like every frame just looks like a painting that belongs in a museum. It's so good. But I was also listening to a podcast by Anime Nostalgia Podcast episode where they're talking about animation cells, and Bloodlust came up and they were talking about like, this movie's cells are so gorgeous, but the people who were making the cells made like less than $1 per cell, which is that's not great. So like I'm definitely glad that working conditions for animators have improved to some degree. But also it's so good.
Yeah.
It's a tough situation there.
Yeah, that is sort of a weird thing that you get then, where it's more frustrating almost because it's an intersection at a time when, especially when it was a U.S. co-production, when there's more money being pushed into things. That is sort of, honestly, it's kind of how things are right now with Netflix and a bunch of people moving in to finance stuff. It's really not trickling down to the workers, unfortunately, in a frustrating way. But it is really just all the same. At the very least, we can recognize their craftsmanship.
Absolutely.
Because it is, like you said, an absolutely gorgeous film, like just top to bottom. The composition, Kawajiri is incredibly stylish, and it's honestly, it's interesting comparing not just this to the original film, but to his work on Wicked City and Shinjuku, just how much he grew as an artist in that decade plus time period, because Bloodlust, while it doesn't use like as much stylized coloring, it does still look incredibly impressive and incredibly stylish. Austin, your thoughts on Bloodlust, which you have just recently seen?
Yeah, I decided to take a break from watching the old one and watch the new one because I thought it would behoove me. Kind of like the Great Pyramids of Giza, it's like the pinnacle of what slave labor can do. I made a list because what occurred to me before I get into anything else, there are some similarities that Bloodlust has with the original one. In the beginning of this film, somebody tries to his shit up in the opening scene right when he rides in. Vampires can catch sharp stuff that you try to hit them with. Vampires like big goth princess. antagonist with a last name that starts with an L. His homies are blonde girls who have families who are vampire hunters or other hunters that got killed. The girl he's trying to save gets the glossy eye treatment in the third act. Final boss never expects who his dad was. Castle crumbling. And this is the second week that Through a Glass Darkly popped up. It is mentioned in Bloodlines. Now on to the thing that Bloodlust did. So this film is so much more complicated. Like, I admire Vampire Hunter D because there are characters that sort of take interesting, like, motivational paths through the movie. Like, it's not 100% rote. It's not full stupid. Where then they just crank that up in Bloodlust. Like the initial antagonist, what happens to him and what his motivations are. And then, like, every character has that. And the designs are incredible. I thought the mercenaries looked just great. But really what hit me was just how sad this movie was. How much it made me cry. I could not believe it, dudes. It was so good. There were a couple things that happened at the end that just really punched me right in the emotions. Just like how rich of a film it is. I mean, I like the other one. It's a very good time. But Bloodlust is this like whole different thing. Big, complicated menagerie of cool stuff happening. It's like two completely different beasts, mostly because of budget and the ability to, like, over time get more comfortable with Vampire Hunter D's success, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I definitely think that's part and parcel. Both are very good points. Just this concept sort of coming into its own and popular consciousness really glomming onto it in a big way. Yeah, and all the intermediary vampire media in between, and Kawajiri's no stranger to using that in his films. You see a lot of that, particularly in Cyber City Oedo, the third episode of that uses a lot of vampire stuff in like a science fiction-y sort of context. And so obviously that sort of translated very well into Bloodlust. And Bloodlust is it's a far tighter film. The OVA, I just want to call it an OVA because that is really what it feels like, the original. It ambles a lot. It kind of loses its track of itself in a lot of ways, but it is still a pretty straightforward story. It's never like confusing. It's just a bit ambling at times. And Bloodlust is, again, absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. The only thing I think it might lose is some of the world-building elements to it. Just purely like visual world-building stuff a little bit, just because so much of it is dedicated to that very well-refined Gothic style, but that refinement comes at the cost of almost the post-apocalyptic quality. I think, but again, what is compelling about Bloodlust is its use of this sort of Gothic post-apocalypse. Like, that's really unique and cool. And the tragedies and the motivation of the villains, I think in particular, is what really, really, really elevates it too, like narratively. And I think the characters overall are a lot better. They talk less, which is, I think, to their benefit. The major players, the villains, talk a bit more, and their words aren't quite so empty. You have some weight when they're talking, because whenever Magnus opens his mouth, it's going to be just to say something or to make somebody's head explode. Just slam them against a bunch of walls and then crush their skull.
Like a Gary Spot thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's the gravity gun. Gordon Freeman is Magnus Lee. Yeah, I think Bloodlust is overall a much better film. If I was to get together with a bunch of friends and just want to kind of bullshit watching a movie, the original is probably the one I would put on. But if I knew we weren't going to just be munching on snacks and chatting through it and actually focusing on it, I would be like, yeah, let's watch Bloodlust.
So we're bringing the original Vampire Hunter D to the next hangout at Brandon and Scott's.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as we get their home theater.
It is a special Vampire Hunter D / Star Wars Droids party.
Yeah. The perfect combo. Yeah, no, but Bloodlust is a really cool, unique film. But circling back to that original 1985 film, just one last time for overall thoughts. Any final concluding thoughts, Tim?
It's a really fun, just kind of like Halloween anime movie. I definitely recommend it. I recommend it if you're a fan of Hellsing, because like I said, it's definitely an influence there, particularly in the character of Alucard. I haven't played really enough Castlevania to know too much about that, and I barely watched the Netflix series. I'm assuming it is also an influence there, and like Ethan mentioned, the art is by the creator of Final Fantasy. So if you like really cool like fantasy, sci-fi kind of art aesthetics, it's definitely a cool thing to check out. Overall, just just a fun time, cool movie to watch. And then after you watch that, you can also watch Bloodlust.
It would be an interesting double feature, honestly. I don't think I've ever watched both in the same sitting, but that would be what a whiplash of going from one to the other, honestly. Austin, overall, any concluding thoughts?
I think there was like a making of featurette that was featured on the Urban Visions DVD to bring up one more time where they, I think it's the director says that the videos like this are for people who are done studying with exams and they're tired. So they wanted to make a movie that wouldn't make them more tired. And that instinct completely followed through. Vampire Hunter D is a lot of fun. I showed it to somebody who was having a terrible night and they were big mad and they just loved it. Like, also, this person was like a fan of vampire media in general, like watched all of Castlevania and had a great time. And just having more of this stuff, like Vampire Hunter D is its own whole universe with its crazy weird sci-fi, but some of it's the past aesthetic. I can't recommend it enough. It's very accessible, very fun, and spooky enough. It's kind of spooky. So good Halloween watching as well.
Yeah. The horror elements we don't emphasize quite so much. It's very much sort of an action horror, but there are definitely moments of it where it's very effective. Like that opening is genuinely pretty darn good in how it's depicted and its use of color, those blues. I really love that. And yeah, I think my quick wrap up is I like it a lot. It's a very fun movie. It's not my absolute favorite thing. I don't have the same reverence for it that I know some people do, partially just because I wasn't there, which, you know, it's such a significant sort of film to like Western Japanese animation fandom, particularly in the States. But I'm glad it came over, and I think it was significant for a reason. It's the perfect film to come out in the early 90s in the US for it, and I'm glad we got it. I'm glad it exists. And thank you, Toyoo Ashida, for making yourself miserable for like a whole year working on a television series and 2 feature films. And with that, I think that'll be closing. For all of you listening on the audio platforms, be sure to give us a high ranking or just follow if there is no ranking on your platform of choice. If you're watching this video on YouTube, be sure to click that like button and give us a subscribe. Follow us. We make good content. Austin works very hard to make these enjoyable for you. So check those out. And tune in next week where we will be discussing the Sam Raimi classic, Spider-Man 2. No. We will be discussing Sam Raimi's debut feature, The Evil Dead, hosted by Tim Sullivan. Check that out. It'll be a spooky old time. And take care. Au revoir.
Farewell.
I slid my ticket across the table and I said, "Sorry guys, I gotta see about a girl."